Raised on D&D podcast helps to enrich your family's gaming experience by bringing you interviews with parents, educators, game designers, and influencers. Join us as we delve into the many ways that tabletop role-playing games inspire creativity, develop communication skills, and create lasting bonds among players. Your host has been an avid gamer since childhood, and now his kids are being raised on D&D. Here is your host, Nick Cardarelli.
Welcome back, gamers. I'm your host, Nick Cardarelli, and this is Raised on D&D. My next guest is from Idaho Falls, Idaho. He runs a series of long-term D&D 5e campaigns in the Mad Gnome Dungeon. At any given time, he has 3 to 4 long-term in-person campaigns running. He has partnered with a local business to start hosting D&D and other gaming events. He's building out a dedicated D&D gaming dungeon as well as a tavern-style common area for casual gaming. On top of this, he's working toward publishing his multi-campaign setting, Tales of Alduin, as well as working on publishing a casual fantasy-themed skirmish board game. You know him online as Mad Gnome Gaming. Please welcome Rulon Leman. Hey, Rulon.
How are you doing, Nick? Thanks for having me on the show.
Thanks for being here. I'm so excited about all the things that you're doing, and I can't wait to hear about all the projects you got coming down the pipe. But before we jump into all that, can you take us back to your first experience with tabletop role-playing games and Dungeons and Dragons?
Sure. It actually doesn't go that far back. When I was younger, I've been a fantasy nerd since a kid. I was raised on Lord of the Rings and whatnot. I actually got into the SCA, the Society for Creative Anachronism, at a very young age. Played in that for several years, but my failing body prevented me from continuing it. But only in, I think, 2018, a friend of mine had heard about D&D, started doing some research, wanted to play. So he and I and my wife and a couple other friends got together, and my wife and I both just took to it like fish in water. That went for about 2 years, and then scheduling and whatnot, things fell apart, and had a bit of a break. And then my wife actually, I thought I was done. I thought, well, that was a fun little stint, but time to grow up. And my wife actually said, I really miss playing D&D. You should learn how to be a DM. And I said, okay. And bought the Dungeon Master's Guide, read it front to back 2 or 3 times just to absorb as much information as I could, and got a couple friends together, homebrewed a campaign, and it actually ran for a couple months. And then COVID happened and put the kibosh on that. So we had to take a break. But then about mid 2020, I got another campaign going, and it's just been nonstop since then.
That is fantastic. It's so incredible. A lot of our listeners should be familiar with the Society of Creative Anachronisms. I'm down here in the Kingdom of Tramiris. But for those who don't know, Society of Creative Anachronisms is this amazing international organization, and we basically bring the medieval times to life, right? That is awesome that your journey kind of started there. And you were a player in 2018 when you first sat down.
Sure.
What was that first game like? Can you remember?
Yeah, it was pretty intense. Pretty much everybody there was new to playing. The DM was new. There was, I think, 8 players at the outset of it, which was a lot. And I had, I'm the type of person that likes to, if I'm going to jump into something, I want to jump in and make sure I know what I'm talking about. So I rolled up a gnome rogue. Grimmel Giblets was his name. And the first session was actually quite enjoyable. We went to some town to just stock up on provisions for a journey and end up causing a massive riot and collapsed the entire government structure of the town. And yeah, so things went to complete chaos from the outset of the campaign, but it was a lot of fun. The cooperative storytelling, I played a lot of video games back in the day, and I still do, but just being able to sit with friends and people, and strangers, and just share in that cooperative storytelling was just incredible, unlike anything I'd ever experienced before. So it was, just fantastic.
And what I love about it is you and your wife jump into the hobby together, and you're done with it. COVID's happened. It's put a stop on a lot of everyone's in-person games. A lot of us went to the internet things like that. I'm fortunate enough that I have enough family members that I have a whole table anytime I want to run games. And now my teenagers are starting to run games, so I get to sit down and actually play now and things like that. So we were fortunate in that way. But what I love about your story and what's unique about it is your wife says, you know what, I miss it. Why don't you dungeon master? Now, jumping behind the screen is sometimes very difficult, and you jump in and you just immediately start absorbing as much information as possible and trying to learn the rules and read. What was that first out of the gate, getting behind the screen, that first session like when you were finally the dungeon master?
Sure. It's funny. I had read all the, the memes and the tropes about how starting in a tavern is kind of blasé. And so I thought, I don't want to start in a tavern. I want to start with something that's intense and exciting. I'm a big horror fan, so I wanted to do something a little creepy. So the first session I played, I gave everyone a little bit of backstory. You had all run into this, I think it was like a cathedral, a chapel, to chase this monster. And that was the only backstory I gave them. And so the very first line was, you awake, you open your eyes, it is pitch black, and you hear the sound of chewing. And then I had this really creepy monster chewing sound going on in the background. And the players immediately just, got the heebie-jeebies. And so they woke up, no memory of how they got where they were. They were in the back end of a dungeon and had to fight their way out of the dungeon, try and piece back together how they got in there. And then when they exited the dungeon, they found themselves in a totally unfamiliar landscape, and then it built on from there. So I wasn't sure how well it was going to be received, but I've run that campaign a couple times, and it was really fun right off the bat to see everybody react so, positively, but also creeped out by the outset of the campaign. Yeah.
That is phenomenal. What amazes me is I learned to dungeon master almost as an apprenticeship. I put in so many hours as a player, and I had to model my dungeon mastering style off of my dungeon master. And I kind of had to look at how he did things and say, okay, I liked this, I didn't like that. Let me try this. Let me think, how would he have done it? And then kind of go from there. Very Jedi Sith-ish, if you would.
Sure.
So, but the fact that you jump behind the screen, you got to play in a campaign and then jump behind the screen and go, you know what? I'm going to turn this whole thing on its head and have them fight out of the dungeon. That's just incredible. That's the kind of amazing creativity that as dungeon masters we strive for, and for that to be your first session, that's just wonderful. I love hearing that. You game with your wife. You mentioned that you game with your brother and his girlfriend, and so one of the things that we emphasize here on Raised on D&D is gaming with family. Can you just share with us your thoughts on how tabletop role-playing game, the hobby, has really changed your relationship within your family and with all the people who have been at your table, how that's expanded your social circle and how that's impacted you?
Sure. Yeah. I've made lifelong friends from playing this game, and my wife and I were very similar in a lot of ways, but we didn't have a lot of hardcore shared hobbies. I played a lot of video games. She loves to crochet. And so, we have similar taste in music, but D&D was something that really, really allowed us to spend time together, enjoy each other's company, build our relationship together, as well as play this amazing game. She's an incredible player. She's playing a storm sorcerer right now. She had played a rogue previously, and it's just super fun watching her dive into it and role play and whatnot. And then, my brother, he and I were the biggest nerds when we were little kids. We would make up foam swords and just beat the ever living crap out of each other, pretending we were, Lord of the Rings or Willow or what have you. And he was actually, when I started playing back in 2018, he was one of the players. And then he ended up moving to Arizona, and he started running his own game, had some friends there and playing, and then just really missed playing. So he asked if I would start DMing again. And I hadn't really done online DMing up to that point, but I thought I'd give it a try. So got a Roll20 account. And it's still a little, I'm not super great at the online DMing. I need to improve on it, honestly. But it's been fun. He and his girlfriend Sarah are phenomenal role players as well, and the hijinks that those two and my wife come up with are amazing. And it's a good way to spend time with my brother, who's 1,000 miles away, that otherwise, we text back and forth, but grown adult brothers don't just sit and chat on the phone for hours on end. Maybe other brothers do, we don't. And so it's been a really good way to be able to actually talk to my brother and spend quality time with him without being physically there. And then my daughter, she is 7, almost 8 years old, and she has been just leaning over my shoulder since I started playing when she was a small child, and she absolutely loves playing D&D. She and my wife, I run a campaign for the two of them, and it's helped her with reading comprehension, helped her with math, which is great. We homeschool, and she is consistently, she does an online program at the local school district, I should say, and just whip smart mathematician. She always scores high, and I honestly think a large part of that is rolling dice, adding rolling dice, figuring out her mods, and she does it all. And they were level 3, 2 level 3 players, and I threw a level 6 demon at them, and she was a moon druid and just absolutely laid waste. Like, I didn't even have time to roll up and cause the danger. They just mopped the floor with me. So, and she loves art. She loves brainstorming dungeons with me and wants to be her own DM. I've had her DM a couple rules light DM type of games. And so it's just amazing seeing her so invested and so excited about, something that I love. I had amazing parents, but we never had real shared interests. I don't want to say black sheep of the family, but I was the weird one who was into SCA and stuff. And so to be able to have something like that with my daughter, especially, is just unbelievably cool. And I've got 2 other younger children that are, I'm sure, going to be just as excited to play. So being able to play with family is just incredible. And yeah, I've made a lot of friends that I hadn't known prior to playing D&D, and it's just been incredible helping, growing this group of friends, growing a local community, which I hope to continue to expand on and grow. And yeah, it's just incredibly fulfilling to be able to share this with friends and family.
Well, that is wonderful. It's our journey. We're homeschoolers as well. Now, mine are a little bit older. Mine are all teenagers now, so it's like having 3 roommates that don't pay rent and eat all your food.
Yeah, exactly.
But we started gaming at the tabletop with them very, very young, and so they've basically been raised up on D&D, and now it's just so rewarding to see them gaming together. They have all these inside jokes from our campaigns. Now they're running games, things like it's so great to hear about families gaming together and how it creates those bonds. And
Sure.
It's just wonderful to hear that you have a similar experience. It's kind of mushroomed from there, right? So we're talking 2020, mid 2020, you jump in behind the screen, you started home brewing right out of the gate, right? And now you've got all these campaigns going. You've got all this presence on Twitter and Instagram and TikTok. How did it just expand and explode like this for you?
Sure. So yeah, my initial campaign, COVID kind of killed that, and we all, some of those players moved out of state, some of them, went off into their own thing. So I was kind of biding my time, fleshing out the campaign, and then actually got a coworker. I work for I manage a guitar shop, a music store here in town, and we were interviewing an employee, And the boss said, "Oh, what do you do for fun?" He said, "Oh, I'm a big D&D guy." And I said, "Hire that man." And he's also a dungeon master. So he moved into town, and I said, "Okay, I got to get a game going." So I got him, I got my wife, and then actually put out in some local Facebook groups just saying, "Hey, I'm looking for 3 or 4 more players." And it's funny, there's this trope that's unfortunate that D&D is for a bunch of, basement dwelling, smelly, mouth breathing dudes, which I am. But I actually got 3 young women who were, early 20s, late teens, who jumped on board. And so my first, full-length campaign that I ran was my coworker CJ, my wife, and then 3 other women. So, 1 guy to 4 girls. And we played every single week on Sunday, 4-hour sessions, and the storytelling was great. Everybody worked together as a whole. I wanted more. So I got really into, I'm terrible at painting minis, but I love painting minis. So I started, and there's a really cool game shop here in town called Gameopolis. I love supporting them. So started buying lots of minis, painting minis. And so I started Instagram initially, just started painting little minis and taking pictures just for that sweet like action. And then I actually started playing in a campaign with a buddy of mine who I played in a band with. We were playing Tomb of Annihilation, and I came in right at the end of it, within the last 6 sessions. And as they wrapped up, I said, "Hey, if you guys are looking to keep playing, I have this other campaign I've been running. I'd love to run it with you guys." And so they jumped on board. And so I had 2 campaigns going, the same storyline going concurrently. And then we'd play, my buddy CJ, he would run one shots for us occasionally. We'd do a Thanksgiving one shot where we had to go track down, what was the turkey's name? Goblor, the roast lord, and, funny stuff like that. And then CJ, actually, up until that point, I had kind of poo-pooed TikTok. I thought that's just, that's for dancing on and whatever. I'm not going to do it. Thanks, but no thanks. And then he actually started making these videos at work asking me D&D themed dad jokes and kind of springing them on me. And it had this huge reception. I said, crap, now I got to do TikTok. So I started a TikTok and had, a decent amount of followers and this, that, and the other. And I had a couple of videos. I had a video where I've custom built this gaming table off of an old dining table that I got for cheap, and that had a really good reception. And then I just got hooked, and I love posting recreations of the things that happen in our game. There was one that I posted about a month ago about one of my players stopping a whale dead in its tracks with a rod of holding, because they were trying to hook a whale to bait a dragon with, and it unfortunately worked really well. And that video just exploded. It just boggles my mind that people like watching anything that I make. But so yeah, and then I started Twitter, just trying to interact with more content creators and D&D people, and that has started to do very well. And then yeah, I've gotten requests for more and more campaigns. I run an online campaign with my wife and my brother and his girlfriend. And then I started the Tales of Alduin. Once I wrapped up my first big campaign, we immediately jumped into a new one. And I had spent so much time fleshing out this world. I thought, why don't we have more campaigns? And so that's when I started running. I've got, I think, 3 campaigns running within the same continuity in Alduin right now.
What I love about the story is I think it's going to go real old school, because you're like, yeah, we start reaching out to local players and saying, hey, I need to find some players or whatever. And then it goes completely the other way with the new younger crowd that's really predominating gaming now. And and then it goes from there, and then you get into another group and you're like, hey, let me run this same campaign. Now, I don't think a lot of dungeon masters have that unique situation where you can run your homebrewed original module multiple times for different groups of players, different tables. And I've been able to experience that a few times. And what I really like about it is, whether you're running a book mission or your own homebrew with a different composition of players, it never goes the same way twice.
Yeah.
And it helps you as the dungeon master go, oh, okay, well, there's a hole I left that I didn't think to fill, and you got to kind of fill it on your feet. Or you go, okay, they're going to go the same way, so I'm going to put some of the same stuff in front of them. But because they're different characters, they handle it completely different. And I love that. So that's great that you got to experience that. And that kind of helped you, like you said, flesh out the world that you created and said, you know what, why don't I just keep investing in that? And that's how beautiful settings are created. That's how world books that will travel beyond Idaho, travel beyond the United States, and people will be playing your campaign setting in other countries. And it's just mind-blowing that you're like, I just made this up in my basement with my friends. And now I'm getting emails from people in Asia telling me how much they love my setting. And I think that is just phenomenal. The way that tabletop role-playing games, it inspires us, you know. And I'm going to take it back to your history with the Society for Creative Anachronisms. You know, a lot of people don't realize, you know, everybody thinks it's just guys hitting each other with sticks, right? And ladies too. But, you know, there's all these other aspects, the dance, the culinary, the craft side of things, right? The armor making. There's all these different art forms within that hobby. And tabletop role-playing games is the same kind of way, where you started painting miniatures and then you end up building your own game table. I mean, I just see the similarities of how you can expand that creativity. It's not enough that you made your own world. It's not enough that you became your own dungeon master. No, you gotta keep going. I think that's great, because this hobby, these games, they inspire us. Just try stuff and do stuff that we wouldn't have before 2018, right? So I think that's great. Tell us a little bit more about this partnership to create a designated gaming spot right there in your hometown.
This was a wild 1 in a million chance that I'm still reeling about. So there's a little coffee shop, in town called the Egyptian Coffee House, and really cool vibe. It just came under new ownership. The old owner, Terry, great person. She owns a little metaphysical healing store around the corner. And then the new owners were actually, they own a company called Grave Robber Coffee, and Grave Robber was started to help addicts lift themselves up out of addiction, and robbing the grave of addicts basically was the job. So really cool people, really cool message they were trying to get across. But they do open mic nights there, and I like to sing and play guitar. So a buddy of mine and I would go, and one night, just on a whim, and I sing covers. I have the song I had written called Ode to a Mug of Ale for one of my NPCs, a drinking song. And I got up there and I said, who all here plays D&D? And literally nobody raised their hand except for my buddy Jesse, who's one of my players. And I said, well, this is the wrong demographic, but I'm going to sing it anyway. So I sang my drinking song, totally embarrassed. But afterwards, I met with the owners, and they said, you know, we actually have a barista here who would love to start playing D&D in the shop. And I said, oh, that'd be really cool. Well, if you ever need any help, this is what I do. And I showed them a picture of my game room and everything. And they said, that would be really fun. Let's meet. And I said, okay. So we set up a time, and I came, and I was expecting to just, you know, it's not a very large shop upstairs. So I figured just, you know, they'd put me in a corner and play a couple games. And we got together, and they said, have you seen our basement? And I said, I didn't even know this place had a basement. So they took me down there, and it's an old school building in downtown Idaho Falls. It was a jewelry shop and this, that, and the other. But there's this massive room, and the owner, Dana, says, I think this would be really cool to play D&D. What would you think of turning this into what you have at your house? And I about just passed out and died right there. So we've worked out. I'm going to start running games on the ground floor pretty soon. I actually have a meet and greet scheduled next Saturday to invite new people in to, you know, roll up characters, learn the basics of D&D, play some basic combat, and then we'll schedule out some sessions beyond that. But in the meantime, I'm working on turning a good chunk of the basement into a part of it will be my kind of my personal dungeon master space, where it'll be the Mad Gnome Dungeon 2.0, so to speak. And then in front of that, we're going to have a kind of a common area with tables and chairs where people can just sit down and play board games. We're probably going to do some low-key live music down there and stuff like that. So it's just, I never in a million years thought I would get invited to do something like this. And the owners are just incredible people. So yeah, this starting next Saturday, we're gonna get it going, and then as soon as I can get the dungeon built out, and I want to make it, I mean, I don't like doing anything unless I'm going whole hog. So I'm gonna have a faux mirrors with lighting behind them so I can simulate weather effects and lighting effects. I'm gonna have, stuff like that throughout the dungeon, make it really feel immersive and not just, you're playing in a basement with some sheets tacked up. So yeah, it's going to be a project for sure. I used to be a contractor, so I've got some construction chops. So I'm hoping we can turn it into something that's just a really cool destination for the local gaming community as well as other people. Idaho Falls is kind of the stopping point on the way up to places like Yellowstone and Jackson, and we're not far from Salt Lake. So I'm hoping we can get people to come from out of town and play at my table, and I just want to play a lot of D&D.
That is incredible. I think one of the greatest things about the being able to introduce people to Dungeons and Dragons that normally wouldn't, with the advent of actual play online, it kind of pulled back the curtain. I'm an old school gamer of 30 years. I come from a time period when you have to have a secret handshake, and you had to know which basements were the right kind of dungeon, right? That kind of thing.
Right.
And so to go from that to everybody and their brother going, man, I've heard about that, and now that I've watched it online and I see what people do with it, man, I really want to try that. And
Sure.
To know that you're going to be able to take that out of your basement, take it off the internet, and you're going to be able to put it right there in downtown, right underneath a popular coffee shop, and people are going to be able to go, hey, what do you guys do downstairs? And they're going to be like, oh, that's Dungeons and Dragons. And, that's, and for folks to be able to have access to that is
Sure.
just incredible. And you're absolutely right. With you being the stopping point to all kinds of real world adventure, how much more fun would it be on the way to or from to stop off and hit some high fantasy adventure at the
Sure.
table with you? That
Sure.
is just fantastic. And I love that you're swinging for the fences. There's going to be mood lighting, weather simulators, all that stuff on top of it all, just to have that atmosphere. Tales of Alduin, where are we at in the process of maybe making that into some kind of book, Kickstarter, crowdfunding, get it PDF, drive-through-rpg.com? Where are we at with that?
Sure. So I take a very top-down approach to world building, homebrewing. My initial campaigns I run were a kind of a separate world, but within the same. There'll be Easter eggs, for lack of better terms, between the two campaigns. But when I build a campaign, I come up with what's the main kind of conflict I want to try and enact, and from that I come, who are my main players? Okay, what factions do they belong to? And I kind of build out the world from there. So I have Alduin is one continent on this larger world. So I have other continents and stuff I'll eventually want to dive into. But the goal, so to speak, is I want to start publishing small adventure compilations that are all set within the world, that allow people to initially jump in and experience some of what I've created, and then as time goes on and as funding allows and whatnot, look at publishing it as an entire world system. I have quite a few monsters I've been trying to build out. I've got obviously the settings and the maps and the story, a lot of magic items and whatnot. So yeah, the initial goal is to come out with little, Tales of Alduin Volume 1 and have 5, miniature adventures, not necessarily one shots. And some of them will be kind of lighthearted. Some of them will be very dark. Some of them will be a classic dungeon crawl, and use those to, start generate a little capital to hire some good artists. I have some really good artist friends that I have lined up to help me start with some of these projects I'm working on. So I've got the adventure compilations are kind of step one. I have obviously the main goal is to publish the world setting and let people play their own games and tell their own stories. What I really try not to do is make it such that somebody has to play the story how I want it played. I like creating, for lack of better terms, a playground for other people to come play in. So I've got, I try to have good characters, good NPCs, good character arcs, and the raw meat that you need there to craft your own story and hopefully have an enjoyable time doing it. I'm also, because I'm a glutton for punishment, building a mega dungeon that will exist within the continuity of the world. The mega dungeon was conceived to allow casual D&D players to come in, dungeon crawl for a session, but not have to commit to a long-term campaign. I run long-term campaigns, of course, but I've really been stuck on this idea of accessibility for people who can't commit to, scheduling wise, you've got kids, what have you. So I've got this mega dungeon. I have it mapped out. I've started to do artwork for it. It's at present about a 260 room dungeon.
Wow.
That will probably get bigger as time goes on because feature creep is my middle name. So yeah, the Mad Gnome brand, we're kind of trying to build that up, build awareness, and use that to start launching the adventure compilations. And then hopefully within, I hate putting time limits on things, but I know it must be done. I'm hoping within the next couple of years, I can look at actually launching a Kickstarter to publish the big setting.
That's fantastic. And, again, I can't believe what a whirlwind it's been for you, going from 2018, sitting down at the table, to here we are in 2022. And,
Sure.
And we're already, creating communities, creating content, and creating adventure books. I can't thank you enough. I mean, it's so incredible that you shared your journey with us today, and I love all the content, following you on all the socials. I know a lot of your fans are listening today, but I hope that a lot of folks that are just now learning about Mad Gnome Gaming are going to start following you and are going to start getting super excited, as I am, about those adventure compilations. Can't wait to get my hands on them, bring them to my table, and run them for my family.
Of course. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us on another episode of Raised on D&D podcast. Be sure to subscribe and follow on all your favorite apps and social media.